YouTubers, I welcome you to this video on how to play Sudoku. This video is for absolute beginners. Through this video, I'm going to cover the basics of the Sudoku and a solving technique for beginners which is very easy to understand and follow. This will make Sudoku puzzle fun to solve and not stressful. Now before I walk through the technique, you need to know some basics terminologies used in Sudoku. This type of Sudoku puzzle is in a form of a 9 by 9 grid. That means that there are 9 rows and 9 columns. At the intersection of each row and column, there is a square called cell, and it can have numbered from 1 to 9. There are in total of 81 cells in this grid. Some of the cell comes pre-populated with numbers, while others have to be figured out following Sudoku rules, which I'm going to explain next. There are 9 rows and each row must have numbers from 1 to 9 with no repeats. Same way, we have 9 columns and each column must have numbers from 1 to 9 with no repeats. This 9 by 9 grid is broken down into smaller groups of 3 by 3 cells called block or box. Each block must have values from 1 to 9 with no repeats. You can see that this grid is made up of 9 3 by 3 blocks. So let's jump into solving and learning the technique next. Okay friends, so let's get started playing and learning this Sudoku puzzle. Now best way for beginners to approach the solution is working through the puzzle horizontally. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. I'm gonna select the set of 3 rows and gonna process all the numbers before moving on to the next set. I'm going to start with the number 1. I see a number 1 for the bottom row and for the middle row. So the possibilities for number 1 for the top row has to be one of these 3 cells. Now I see a number 1 in this column. So that makes this cell not an option for number 1. Another number 1 over here. So number 1 cannot come in this cell as well. So the only option for number 1 for the top row has to be this cell. Moving on to number 2, I see a number 2 for the bottom row over here. So the possible option for the top row has to be either this cell or any of these two cells. Now what I noticed that there is already a number 2 over here. What that means is this cell is not an option for number 2. Another number 2 in this column. So this cell is also not an option. So I can safely put number 2 for top row over here. Now we have a number 2 for a bottom row and the top row. So for the middle row, number 2 can possibly come either over here or over here. Now because we have a number 2 in this column, so this cell is not an option for number 2, and the only place I can have a number 2 for middle row has to be over here. Moving on to number 3, here is the number 3 for the bottom row, middle row. So the possible option for the top row has to be one of these two cells. Now I see a number 3 in this column. So this cell is not an option and I can safely put number 3 for the top row over here. Next I'm gonna look at number 4. What I noticed that number 4 is already marked for all the 3 rows, so we do not have to take any action. Moving along, number 5 for the middle row is over here, and for the bottom row it can possibly come either over here or possibly over here, or it can come over here. Now what I noticed that there is already a number 5 in this column. Now this cell is not an option for number 5. So I can have a number 5 either over here or over here. So one of the two cells has to be number 5. I'm going to represent it little differently as I'm going to use this information as we move along this puzzle. I'm going to mark it like this, which is going to tell me that one of the two cells has to be number 5. Now looking for number 5 for the top row, it could be either in this cell or in this cell. What we know that number 5 can either be over here or over here in this block. So this cell is not an option for number 5, and the only place where I can have a number 5 is over here for the top row. Now I have been marking all these boxes and putting crosses. This is just for the demonstration purpose. I'm using all these boxes to demonstrate and teach you how I am figuring out the numbers. When you are practicing and doing your own puzzles, you really do not have to mark these boxes and put crosses and then later on rub. This is just for me to be able to explain how I am figuring out where to put the numbers and the technique that I'm using. I'm explaining it this way. Next, I'm gonna look at number 6. I see that number 6 for the bottom row over here and the top row over here. So the possibilities for the middle row, it has to be either this cell or this cell. Now, I do not have any way to further narrow down which of the two cells is going to hold number 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent it the same way that one of these two cells is going to be holding number 6. And I'm going to mark it the same way. So I'm marking exactly the same way we did for number 5 for the bottom row. And this is going to tell me that one of the two cell has to be number 6. Moving on to number 7. What I noticed that number 7 is not there for any of the three rows. So we can safely ignore it for now and we can skip it and move on to number 8. I see number 8 for the bottom row and for the middle row. So looking at the number 8 for top row, I see there is only one cell and we can safely put number 8 in this cell. Last, I'm gonna look at number 9 and I see number 9 for the top row over here. So for the middle row, number 9 can be either over here or possibly over here. Now what do we know that these two cells can either hold number 6 or number 9. So let me represent it little differently as we are going to use this information. I'm going to draw a circle over here and I'm going to write it down that this cell can either have number 6 or number 9. Same way for this cell, this can either have number 6 or number 9. What that tells me that if any of these two cells is number 6, then other one has to be number 9. Moving on to bottom row, for the number 9, I see this as a possible option or number 9 can come over here. Now, what we see that these two cells can either have number 5 or number 9. So we are going to represent it the same way we did for number 6 and 9 for the middle row. I'm going to draw a circle and I'm going to write it down that this cell can possibly have either number 5 or number 9. Same way over here, this cell can have either number 5 or number 9. Again, if I'm able to figure out one of the two cell is number 5, then other one has to be number 9. Now we have processed all the numbers starting from number 1 till number 9 for all the three rows. Before I move on and repeat the steps for the next set of three rows, I'm gonna look at the individual box or a block in these three rows and look to figure out what are the missing numbers over there. I'm first gonna look at this block, and what I noticed that there is only one cell left in this block and number 7 is missing. So I can safely put number 7 over here. Next I'm gonna look at is the middle block. And over here as well, I noticed that there is only one cell left and the missing number is number 7. So I can put number 7 over here. Last, I'm gonna check this block. And what I notice in this block that there is one cell left and even for this particular block, the missing number is number 7. So I can safely put number 7 over here. Now I'm gonna look at next set of three rows and repeat exactly the same set of steps. I'm gonna start with number one. I see number one for middle row and for the top row. So the possibilities for number one for bottom row has to be one of these two cells. Now I notice number one over here in this column. So this cell is not an option and I can safely put number one for the bottom row over here. Moving on to number two, I see number two for the middle row and top row. So the possibilities for the bottom row is either one of these three cells. So what I noticed that number 2 is already over here in this column. So this cell is not an option. And earlier we identified number 2 in this column. So this cell is also not an option. So the only place I can have a number 2 for the bottom row is this cell. Moving on to number 3, I see number 3 for the top row and bottom row. So the possible options for number 3 in middle row has to be one of these three cells. Now I notice there is a number 3 in this column. So this cell is not an option and I can have a number 3 either over here or possibly over here. So I'm going to represent it the same way we did earlier, which will tell me one of these two cells has to be number 3. Next, I'm going to check number 4. I see number 4 for the middle row over here. And for the top row, number 4 can either come over here or possibly over here, or it can come over here in this cell. Now, I see a number 4 already there in this column. So this cell is not an option for number 4. Another number 4 in this column. So this cell is also not an option. So the only place I can have a number 4 is this specific cell. Now checking number 4 for the bottom row, it can be either one of these two cells. Because there is already a number 4 in this column, so this cell is not an option and I can put number 4 safely over here. Moving on to number 5, I see number 5 for the middle row and the option for the top row, um, either this cell or this cell. Now I see a number 5 in this column, so we cannot have a number 5 over here. So I can put number 5 for the top row in this cell. Now looking for number 5 for the bottom row, there is only one cell left where I can have a number 5, and that is this one for the bottom row. Next I'm gonna check for number 6. I see number 6 for the bottom row, and the only place I can have a number 6 for the top row, because there is only one cell left, it has to be number 6. Now for a middle row, number 6 can either come in any one of these three cells. So what I noticed that there is a number 6 in this column. So this is not an option for number 6. Another number 6 in this column. So this is also not an option. So number 6 can only come in this cell. Now what we know that one of the cells has to be number 3, the one that we have marked, but because 6 is fitting in this specific cell, other one has to be number 3. So I can put number 3 over here. Now let's continue checking the next number, and that is number 7. And what I noticed that number 7 is already covered for all the three rows, so no action required, and I'm gonna move on to number 8. I see number 8 for the top row and for the middle row. So the only place I can have a number 8 for the bottom row is over here, and I can safely put number 8 in this cell. Last I'm going to check number 9. That's the number 9 for the top row, and for the middle row there is only one cell left, and it has to be number 9. Same is the case with the bottom row. It has to be number 9 as there is only one cell left. So now we have processed all the numbers starting from number 1 till 9 for these 3 rows. Next, I'm going to move on to the next set of 3 rows, and we are going to repeat exactly same set of process. Here are the last set of 3 rows, and we are going to repeat the same steps starting with number 1. I see number 1 in the top row and middle row. So for the bottom row, it can either come in one of these 3 cells. I see number 1 that we earlier identified in this column. So this cell is not an option. Another number 1 in this column. So this cell is also not an option. So I can safely put number 1 for the bottom row over here. Moving on to number 2. What I noticed that number 2 is already covered for all the 3 rows. So no action required. So let's move on to number 3. I see number 3 for the bottom row over here. So for the middle row, it can possibly come either in this cell or in this cell. Now because we have a number 3 that we earlier identified over here, so this cell is not an option and I can put number 3 for the middle row over here. Now checking number 3 for the top row, it can be one of the 3 cells over here, and I noticed a number 3 in this column. So this cell is not an option, and another number 3 in this column. So this cell is also not an option. So I can safely put number 3 for the top row over here. Next, I'm going to check number 4. And what I noticed that number 4 is already covered for all the 3 rows. So we do not have to take any action, and we can move on to number 5. I see number 5 for the middle row over here. So the possibilities for the top row can be either of these 2 cells or this one over here. But I see a number 5 in this column. So this cell is not an option. Another number 5 over here. So this cell is also not an option. So I can put number 5 for the top row over here. Now checking for number 5 for the bottom row, I see 2 options where I can have a number 5. But because there is a number 5 in this column, this cell is not an option and I can safely put number 5 over here for the bottom row. Next we are going to check for number 6. I see that number 6 for the middle row over here, and for the bottom row there is only one option where I can have a number 6, and it is this specific cell. Now we know number 6 for the middle row and bottom row. So the possibilities for the number 6 for the top row has to be one of these 2 cells. Now this middle column has only one cell left, and the number missing over here is number 6. So I can safely put number 6 over here. Moving on to number 7, I see a number 7 for a bottom row over here, and for the top row it can be one of these 2 cells. But we identified a number 7 earlier in this column, so this cell is not an option for number 7, and I can safely put number 7 for the top row over here. And for the middle row, there is only one cell left, and we know that it has to be number 7 over here. Next, I'm going to check for number 8. I see a number 8 for the middle row. So for the top row, it has to be either over here or over here. Now I notice a number 8 already here in this column. So this cell is not an option. So I can put number 8 for the top row over here. Now number 8 for the bottom row has to be either this cell or this cell. I see that there is already a number 8 over here. So this is not an option for number 8. So I'm left with this cell that can hold number 8 for the bottom row. Last I'm going to check for number 9. I see a number 9 for the middle row and number 9 for the bottom row. There is only one cell left. I can put number 9 over here. Same is the case for the top row, one cell left, and I can have a number 9 over here. Now we are done with the processing of all the 9 rows and we are left with 4 circles, and next we are going to figure out the numbers for them. First I'm going to check is this block, and what I noticed that in the first column we have number 9 over here, and what that means is this specific cell can have a number 6, not 9. So I'm gonna write it number 6 over here. Now because this cell is number 6, so other one has to be number 9. So this one has to be number 9. That was the reason we have put the circle and we have put the numbers over there, so we can figure out in the end where we can have the numbers distributed. Last I'm going to check this block. What I see that in the last column, I see a number 5 we earlier identified. So we can safely say that this specific cell can only hold number 9. So we can put number 9 over here. And what that means is this particular cell has to be number 5. So I'm gonna write number 5 over here. So that's how we have solved this Sudoku puzzle. With little bit of practice, you will be able to now solve any beginner level Sudoku puzzle. And this technique will act as a foundation for you to work on some of the harder ones. Please don't forget to subscribe my channel and enable notification for automated alert.